Welcome to Femme and Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portella, and today we are traipsing through memories in Vecna's Mind Palace as we look at Stranger Things, Season 5, Episode 5, Jock. Now, before we dive into today's episode, let me tell you how you can support and follow the podcast. You can, of course, subscribe anywhere that you get your podcast. You're on every platform. You can watch full video breakdowns on YouTube. You can follow the podcast on Instagram and on TikTok. That is at Femme and Furious Pod. You can always send me an email at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. Send me what you are excited for in the new year. Like, what are you excited to watch? What are you excited to read? What are you excited to dive into pop culturally? We have an episode coming out that will be around sort of like the pop culture theming that I'm seeing for 2026, as well as some faux pas that happened on the feminine side for 2025. So look forward to that episode. If you have any thoughts about Stranger Things, send them my way. I'll include them in the episodes as we dive in. We'll be doing Stranger Things analysis through the end of January, though the series finale will be this week, up and coming, 2 days from now. It's kind of crazy. That's all that. Last but not least, you can always find full video breakdowns as well as transcripts over on Substack and on Patreon, and you can join my monthly newsletter, Lipstick and Lore. Okay, babes. Let's take a chic peek at episode 5. This is your spoiler warning. We are talking about everything in the Stranger Things universe up until this point. We are not talking about episode 6. We are not talking about episode 7. I will not be going ahead. If I mention something from the play, which I may, I will just give you a spoiler warning in that moment, and you can kind of like skip ahead on your little device that you're listening on, okay? The name of this episode is, as stated, Jock. It is written by Curtis Gwynn. It is directed by Frank Darabont. The vibe check is microwave leftovers that you're really excited to eat that burn your tongue on the first bite but are too cold in the middle. The Farrell factor is a 6 out of 10. Who this episode is for? If you ever feel like you've needed a lobotomy after being mansplained, this episode is for you. If men in positions of authority just immediately make you suspicious on principle, this episode is for you. If you like 80s thrillers, 80s psychological thrillers, this episode is for you. If trust the process has never once worked out for you, this episode is for you. Okay, here's my hot girl hot take. On first watch, I was locked in. Sat and locked and loaded. Okay? The emotional beats were hitting, the tension was tight, and I genuinely found myself on the edge of my seat. This episode on the first go around felt urgent, it felt dangerous, it felt like deeply unsettling to me in a lot of different ways. But on a rewatch, the adrenaline fades and the questions start stacking up. There's so much being introduced in this episode alone, and we are at episode 5 of 8 in a series finale, in its final season. There are so many threads that have been tugged loose over this episode, and suddenly I find myself a little less excited and a little bit more nervous, not because I thought this episode was bad, but just on a rewatch, I am scared that we don't have enough time left to land all of these plot points and have emotional fulfillment with each and every one of these characters with the weight that it deserves. Jock is thrilling, yes, but it also feels like the point where the clock, not Vecna's clock, actually starts audibly ticking, and I was feeling the pressure of it. Okay. Let's dive into today's Femme Frame, where we will explore key feminist themes, history, cultural context, and more. Today's Femme Frame is titled The Vampire Myth as Feminine Horror. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about vampires. Not the sparkly, morally gray, conflicted kind, okay? Although Edward, of course, does fall into the trope that we are about to talk about today. But I mean the original vampires. I'm talking about the original idea of vampires in the way that we saw it get culturally popular as a literary device and a function in storytelling that is describing something that is completely horrific that also happens to correlate to our story today. One of the most dangerous mythical villains that women have faced over and over again across centuries is vampires. And yes, there's blood, and yes, there's horror, but that is not the scariest part. The real danger is what the vampire actually represents. Across mythology, the vampire story barely changes. Barely. Different cultures, different names, same structure. It's almost boring how consistent it is, although this is something that I really love about mythology and really love about stories like this, where we can just add to the lore, add to the mythos of something by continuing to tell the same story, even if we're telling it a completely different way. It tends to be some sort of version of this. You have an older man with power, status, money, or knowledge, and he preys on a young, beautiful woman. He doesn't just hurt her, he literally drains her of her life force, her blood, her youth, her vitality, and then he claims her for forever. Because one of the things that we know about the lore of vampires is that vampires who are made are bound to their makers in some capacity or another. This changes across different devices, it changes across different stories, but we do know that there is some sort of connection between maker and made. Once you're turned, you are never really free. You belong to the one who made you. And not only that, you are often forced to continue the cycle because now this is who you are. You are somebody who also needs to drain somebody of their life force. You are somebody who also needs to take from somebody else. You have to create more vampires, more bodies, more blood, more lives that tie back to the original source. And if we take that concept and we just frame it slightly differently, you get a completely different story. The monster story is a metaphor, and it is a metaphor for grooming. It is seduction with resources, an older man offering protection, status, stability, and in exchange, a woman loses her autonomy, her youth, her future self, and is bound, usually in contract, with a marriage and motherhood as an obligation. Her body is no longer fully her own, and she must continue to produce more bodies. Okay? Vampire stories as a lore or a mythology are not just about taking someone's choice or taking somebody's autonomy. It is about taking somebody's possibility away from them. What future they could have had, what life they may have lived. And oftentimes in all sorts of different vampire stories, we see somebody who's had that choice taken away from them grapple with the life that they are now forced to live versus the possibility of what could have been. And that oftentimes is the internal tension that our, hero or character is moving through as we are listening or watching or digesting vampire lore. And this is why it matters that vampire stories explode in popularity during the Victorian era. That's not an accident. This is a time in history when marriage was treated as a woman's ultimate destiny, but also quietly recognized as a trap for many of these women. And we see it reflected in Victorian literature all of the time. Literally pick a novel. Pick any novel from the Victorian era. Pick any classic piece of literature, and that is what we are discussing. Divorce was nearly impossible, sexuality was heavily policed, and women's labor, emotional and reproductive, was expected and unpaid. And this is what we are talking about in the Victorian era all of the time. But what Gothic literature does really, really well is it takes that quiet part and it says it out loud, but it dresses it up as horror. So most horror stories, classically written in a Gothic context, are a cultural narrative, not just a horror device. Doesn't mean they can't be just used as a horror device, but like ghosts, zombies, vampires, all of these are just literary devices to talk about a cultural phenomenon in a way that presents it as the horror that it is. And that's what this episode of television of Stranger Things does as well. Now, scholars have pointed out that early vampire fiction, like The Vampire in 1819 or later Dracula in 1897, uses the vampire as a symbol of the aristocratic man who is feeding off of young women under the guise of romance and refinement. It is a cultural critique. And in Dracula specifically, the fear isn't just death, it is the corruption of the person. Lucy isn't just killed, she is transformed into something that society deems as monstrous. Mina, on the other hand, is threatened with not destruction, but with being bound and with losing herself and her autonomy. Which brings us back to Callie, because when Callie says that she starts to think of Dr. K as a vampire, that's not random. That's mythically precise, because first it was Brenner and now it is Kay. So even though Kay is a woman, she is an older woman. And same thing, Dr. Brenner, older man. And Dr. Brenner in particular, let's just start there and we will continue the story with Kay. You know, Dr. Brenner didn't just experiment on these girls or on these children, okay? We know that there were boys that were in the Rainbow Room. Obviously, Henry was one of them. But in particular, in this case, when we're talking about Callie and Elle, you know, they were experimented on. Dr. Brenner robbed these children, Henry included, of their childhood, stole their futures, and now, because of what their blood means in the context of the storytelling, that their blood can be the thing that generates more children like them, now they are being hunted. Even though Elle has escaped from the lab, she has not been able to have a normal life. The most normal experience that she had was when she lived in Lenora in California and like went to school for a year or a year and a half. But if we look at Dr. Brenner and now Dr. K as these older characters who are robbing these girls of their youth, whose blood can be used to create more children with powers, more bodies tied to the lab, more lives chained to the maker. And that is textbook vampire lore. It's textbook. And then suddenly we have a story like this where it's no longer sci-fi. It is a cultural retelling in the context of this world, Hawkins, Indiana, the Upside Down, the Memory Palace, Hawkins Lab, whatever language you want to put to wherever we are in the story at this point, right? It is a cultural retelling of the story that pairs with the mythology of the show. It is the same story that we have been telling for hundreds of years. It is just that we have traded in, you know, a cape for a lab coat. And this is why vampire stories never die. They just change outfits, really, because at their core, it is not about the monster proper. It is about systems that drain young women of their life force while calling it protection. And if we go even a little bit deeper here, you know, these pregnant women, who knows how they ended up there, but we know how their story ends because we've seen what happened to Elle's mother. She was electrocuted until she was brain dead, essentially. And so these doctors, Dr. Brenner, Dr. K, who consume the youth and the labor and the blood of these children and still are asking for respect and gratitude, or at least Dr. Brenner was, like calling himself Papa, like it's really, really sick. You know, when we look at it from this context, it is, you know, a story that is about the cycles that reproduce themselves endlessly because breaking free from that vampire narrative is nearly impossible. And it is why vampires are so hard to kill. There's only so many ways that you can kill them. It's usually a stake through the heart or like severing their head. And both of those things tend to be very difficult inside vampire stories. So that's the real horror here. And Callie knows it, and that's why she mentions it and she brings it up, which I absolutely loved and adored. All right, that's our fem frame. Before we dive into today's Slay by Slay, I just want to say that there are so many things that I don't really get to share with my sisters in the way that a lot of other people do, because I'm 16 and 18 years older than them. And so most of my formative texts are things that I introduce to them, that I get to watch them experience. Like my middle sister right now is watching The OC, which is a critical text in my life, and yet something I can share with her, and yet something that will always remain different to us. The closest that we've come to having a moment like this was maybe The Summer I Turned Pretty, but there are so few things that are in the cultural zeitgeist to this capacity and depth that have felt like something I could share with my sisters. And so to have both of my sisters be invested in this story, and for us to be, wrapping up our Christmas dinner, basically, and plopping ourselves down on the couch to sit and watch this story together, I just can't even tell you, like, how moving that is to me and how important it is to me and how exciting it is when you're somebody like me, where I'm like so used to watching things by myself and going through the emotional beats by myself and needing the fandoms online and needing the social media feedback to see what other people are thinking, because I'm usually in the story alone as far as my own viewing experience. To be able to sit on the couch and watch this with my sisters meant so much to me. And in just a couple of days, we're going to see it in theaters, the finale in theaters, with my mom, who's never watched a single episode. But we've been trying to catch her up with slideshow presentations of fun facts and things to know about the finale. My mom's a really good sport. So, but I just can't describe enough like how meaningful this was to me. I was really glad that the first go around, to which we watched all 3 episodes back to back. Like, we started at 8, we were done by 11:30. I just have to tell you, it was an emotional roller coaster to watch it with my sisters and to be able to be on that emotional wave with them and to see that we were all like reacting to the same stuff, or what I reacted to versus what they reacted to. And I think that heightens the viewing experience so much. But I will say that I was really high on it, and like 11:30 turned the TV off and was like, I'm high on this right now, and went to bed. The more I've been able to sit with it, the more I'm like, I don't know that I liked these episodes. So I think the emotional beat of the story and of volume 2 really hit. I also have faith because many times Stranger Things has nailed a finale. I'm just confused about the way that the Duffer Brothers and people have been describing it that work on the show. Like, the Duffer Brothers described this as a dark Christmas. And I don't think there was really anything in this stretch of episodes that was like so dark that I would say it was a dark Christmas. And so I won't give spoilers. Like I said, we won't go ahead if you have not watched, episode 6 and 7 yet. No big deal. But I think the emotional beats of all 3 episodes really hit, and I'm really excited to talk about them. I don't really know that the mythology or the lore of what they have created over 5 seasons is landing for me, but I'm excited to talk it out, and this is why I have a podcast, okay? And I would love your thoughts and opinions. Certainly, I've been getting them on TikTok, so I would love for your thoughts and opinions. I would love to hear them. Please share them with me, and let's dive into it. Let's get into our Slay by Slay. So we start the episode out right where the last episode left off. Will is now coping with his guilt, and I think this is important. I think we really need to start paying attention to what people are struggling with, because as we march towards this final battle, this is what Vecna is going to be using against them. At least they are forewarned that this is something that he likes to do, which is torture people with their innermost struggles. And so for us to keep getting things out in the open is important. And so Will feels like he's failed. He feels guilty. He says, I could have helped them fight if I had just acted sooner, but I was too late, and now he's got all of them, all 12. We failed. I failed. And it's important. Listen, every hero on the hero's journey fails. It is one of the things that is most critical for the ultimate success of the hero long term. And we've seen this even within Stranger Things. So we have seen, we have seen so many people in this story fail and then ultimately succeed. So like take Billy, for example. Billy fails to stand up, for himself against his father and is abused. And we see that cycle of abuse go way down the chains, mean to Max. He's unkind to people at school. He's a bully and a racist and a lot of other things, right? But we end up getting this, I don't even want to say it's a redemption arc. I don't even know if it could be called that. But, for a character who struggled to stand up for himself and therefore perpetuated a cycle of abuse, breaks out of the chain of command of the Mind Flayer in season 3 and ultimately sacrifices himself for Elle. And I think that's really beautiful. Fails and then succeeds, right? Is taken over by the Mind Flayer, tries to break out of it. Max, it's not my fault. Only for him to sacrifice himself in the end. And same thing with Eddie, who's another great character of this, where he talks about it all of season 4. I just ran away. I keep running away. I'm just going to keep running, right? And instead, he runs towards the bats and the danger at the very end of, season 4. And once again, chooses not to run away when that has been the pattern and the cycle that he has continued to perpetuate. And like Max is pushing her friends away when she is grieving everything that has happened with Billy. And in season 4 too, like her best friend has moved across the country. And so she's grieving lots of things. She's grieving the loss of Elle there as well. She writes these letters and they're very detached and she gives them to all of her friends in case I die, but don't read them in front of me, and when she starts to open up and she starts to realize that she's cared for is when we understand that her story is changing and something about her will to live. Not that I think that she was suicidal, but her sort of will to tune into her fighting spirit that we were so used to with Max reemerges. And so, she pulls her friends in close and then there's something about that is healed and she ends up being able to live instead of being another sacrifice in the story. That Vecna. There are so many different times when, this has happened, big or small ways. And for Will to be coping with this idea of we failed, I failed, it is the thing that has to be there in order to motivate him to succeed next time. How would he know what he's capable of when this is the first time that he's ever stretched himself to use his powers this way? And I would say is ultimately a failure in that the thing that he was attempting to do, right, but in many ways is also quite successful because he's never used his powers before and he ends up in a position where he kills 3 Demogorgons at one time in different locations and saves 3 of his friends. And this is important too. And so it's not a total failure. It is just a failure of the limitation of his own perception of what he thinks he should be capable of doing, despite the fact that he's had powers for 0.2 seconds. So, failure is important because it will push him, I think. And, most of the time when we have a person with powers in any capacity, there's usually some sort of like training sequence or like an understanding of our powers. And so we see this over the course of the story with Elle multiple times. We see them testing her and her powers and what she can do. We see that, when she's got the neurodots on, I don't know what to call them, the neurodots on, and she's trying to crush the soda can. We see her using her powers to tune into the frequency, and she's able to pull in the Russians over the soundboard. We see her training in the salt tank. We see her training again with Callie. When she goes and works with Callie, we see her train with Henry and how Henry trains her with her powers. So, we've had quite a few amount of sequences over the course of 4 seasons of Elle training her powers. Will's never trained before. Will's had no training sequences and is doing all of this just off of intuition, just off of what he thinks maybe he can do. And I don't think we'll get much training sequence from it, but I just want to say that, it's very alternative to how we typically see stories with people with powers told, for him to feel like he's a failure. But ultimately, he needs to fail, right, in order to be a hero moving forward. And also for him to be able to cope with his guilt so that he can course correct this and actually come up against his guilt later on and make a different choice and find a different solution. All right, then it cuts to the Creel house. We see, just before we get to the Creel house, we see them in the little spire lab, the little spire circle. I don't really know what to call it. And we see these children, particularly we see Derek, because that is the character that we've been focused on, obviously, getting pumped filled with these mind flayer particles. And honestly, this is still from season 1. One of the most graphic visual horror beats that they have. It is so gross. It makes me gag every time. Audibly was dry heaving while we were sitting and eating popcorn together on my couch with my sisters. And my one sister just gave me a side eye, and I was like, I'm sorry, it's so gross. It gets me every time. It hits me literally right in the feels. Then it cuts to the Creel lawn, this sort of 1950 Creel utopia that's going on in Vecna's mind palace. In the speech that he starts to give to these 12 children, Henry mentions A Wrinkle in Time, and so I'm just curious if this is a book that they're reading in school, so he knows that they would all understand this reference, and that's why he brings it up? Or is he just targeting kids that specifically have read this book? I just thought it was interesting that he brought it up. Unless they were reading it in school, why would they all know it? They probably have not all read this book. I'm thinking Derek on his own is reading A Wrinkle in Time. Maybe. But maybe not. Maybe delightful Derek would, but I don't know that dipshit Derek would. All right, now bear with me because we have to go back to season 4 for a minute. So Henry is explaining to these children that he has done some exploration of different dimensions, and that in his exploration, he found somewhere that is free of monsters and free of darkness. And this is what he wants to bring. He wants to bring everybody to the light. So we have to go back to season 4, to the speech that Henry gives Elle. Now, I'm not going to read all of it, but I am going to read a lot of it, okay? Henry says in season 4 to Elle, "Like you, I didn't fit in with other children. Something was wrong with me. All the teachers and doctors said I was broken. They said, my parents thought a change of scenery, a fresh start in Hawkins, might just cure me. It was absurd, as if the world would be any different here. But then, to my surprise, our new home provided a discovery, a newfound sense of purpose. I found a nest of black widows living inside a vent, and most people fear spiders. They detest them. And yet I found them endlessly fascinating. More than that, I found a great comfort in them, a kinship. Like me, they are solitary creatures and deeply misunderstood. They are gods of our world, the most important of all predators. They immobilize and feed on the weak, bringing balance and order into an unstable ecosystem. But the human world was disrupting this harmony. You see, humans are a unique type of pest, multiplying and poisoning our world, all while enforcing a structure of their own, deeply unnatural structure. Where others saw order, I saw a straitjacket. A cruel, oppressive world dictated by made-up rules. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades. Each life a faded, lesser copy of the one before. Wake up, eat, work, sleep, reproduce, and die. Everyone is just waiting for it all to be over, all while performing in a silly, terrible play, day after day. I could not do that. I could not close off my mind and join in the madness. I could not pretend. And I realized I didn't have to. I could make my own rules. I could restore balance to a broken world, a predator, but for good. Now, this speech is important for a couple of different reasons. Number one, it's a nice refresher to remember what Henry's objective is. A predator, but for good. That's a really interesting thing, right? And so the world that we live in, that is dictated by the structure of our reality, our minutes, our days, our weeks, our months, the way that we choose to wake up and experience life, it is something that for whatever reason, structurally, did not work for Henry. And, it makes me wonder if, listen, I think Vecna as a character is displaying some real psychopathy. However, it's making me wonder if, when we go to the beginning of that, I didn't fit in with other children. Something was wrong with me. Something was broken. I'm wondering if there's some sort of neurodivergence in which the structure in which functions well for most people does not function for a character who is neurodivergent. We see this all the time, but we are so much more accepting of this now. Whereas in the 50s, people were still being institutionalized for having autism or being on the spectrum or being neurodivergent in any sort of way. And so we're much more accommodating to these things now and understanding how other people's brains work than we were then. And, that's not what's being explicitly stated. So I'm not saying that that's what this is. I'm saying that I find this to be very coded for that. Maybe that's not what the Duffers are going for. But I find this really interesting. A predator for good, but good for who? Because Henry is aiming to create a world that operates and works well for him, immobilizes and feeds on the weak, to which he was a child and has now been grooming children, right? We're talking a lot about grooming today. Grooming children for this purpose of him. And if we go into D&D lore again, now I am not a big D&D person. I have never played and I'm not big on the mythology, but a quick Google search tells me that Vecna is a person who was a king in the regular world or whatever the real world is in D&D world. I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Vecna is a character who ascends to godhood. And so he says are solitary creatures and they are gods of our worlds. And what do gods of worlds do? They dictate the rules that we are living under. This is true with most mythologies, if not all mythologies, right? We have the 10 Commandments in, Christianity. You have the different rules and laws that were true in ancient mythologies, and oftentimes, how we function in relationship to what a god is, right? If you look at stories like ancient Greece, or if you look at ancient Norse or Celtic mythology, they would be like, it's raining because we've pissed off the god of rain. We need to do this thing to bring peace to the god of rain or whatever. I'm saying rain because it's just on my mind because it's raining right now. But you know what I mean? This is a device that is told in mythology all the time, or I want to get pregnant, so I'm going to go pray to the goddess of fertility and do these rituals and do these things and leave something out on my altar for her. And, now I'm hoping that in return, by honoring her, I will get pregnant. This is something that we have created as far as the rules of society have not always been hinged upon the dictation of gods, and yet in a lot of modern exploration of this, they are. So when he says a predator for good, he is looking to ascend himself to godhood to create his own version of reality in which he does not need to live by the rules that other people have put onto him that were oppressive to him. So I think this is important to keep in mind as we go through the rest of this story, because I find this exploration of Henry's character endlessly more fascinating than to just see him as a villain with a plan. It makes the plan more interesting, in my opinion. So we'll see what ends up coming. But if we go back to the Creel house, he's, delivering this speech to these children, to the 12 children that he's now kidnapped. He calls this new world good, free of darkness and monsters. It is the light. So this is what he's trying to create. He is creating a world in his image of what these things mean. Free of darkness, whatever that may mean to him. Free of monsters, aka Dr. Brenner, and, now at this point, Dr. K, who we've already talked about. Like, Dr. Brenner has used Henry's blood to create other children, has completely used him and put him under his control. And so he is a monster, right? In so many ways. And of course, the story is getting at something that is a monster in the real world and something that is also a monster in the supernatural world. But that is what Henry's main goal is now. And so that's what he is telling these children about. And that's what he's like, hey, have fun, go play. Most importantly, rest, because tomorrow we get started. So we are currently on November 5th in our story. And then it cuts to Hawkins' lab, which Dr. K notices that Callie's fingers are twitching. And so she goes up to her, she goes to touch her hand, and she realizes that Callie is a projection. And this is, I think, really just more so for us as an audience to, number one, remind us of what Callie's powers are, that she can make people see things, or alternatively, she can make people not see things with her powers. The other thing is, I think it's telling us that when she's a certain distance away, that the image will start to flicker. I don't know if we knew that information, but if we needed a reminder of it, we got it here. All right, then it cuts to Joyce. She is now all on board with Will killing Vecna. She even states that he chose you because he underestimated you. I think we all did. I know I did. And that is a mistake I will never, ever make again. And so finally, Will Byers gets to fly the coop. Finally, Will has the faith of his mom, and this gives him permission maybe to go a little bit further with his powers than he would have dared to if he was not in a crisis. Although, we're in the crisis at this point. So, like Will says earlier in the season, like, this is the time for risk. This is not the time to play it safe. But finally, Joyce is all on board. And I wonder if it's because he has powers that she feels that he's not so defenseless. Sure, but he's been asking for this faith for a really long time now. And finally, she's given him his blessing. And so Will Byers can finally, activate the thing within him that is going to take him all the way. Who knows what that will be. But we've gotten a taste of it. We'll get a little bit more now that maybe Joyce is giving him like the go. You should go and save the world now. All right, let's talk about Elle and Hopper. Hopper starts making jokes. Elle is not having it. Elle is so annoyed with him. She's like, you were planning to die. You were going to leave me. This is why you didn't want to bring me the upside down. You were going to train me forever and ever. And never let me come because you were planning to just kill yourself. He says, we were in a different situation because of Hedgehog. And so I had to lean on my failsafe. And Elle brings up this really good point, which is like, it's a failsafe that nobody knew about. And I understand what her frustration is. This is her parent figure who's already died once in her mind. She's grieved him between seasons 3 and seasons 4. She's not had a stable life. And this person is important to her. There is this person who you love and care about who she thinks doesn't believe in him. She discovers that because of Sarah, it's not that he doesn't have faith in her, it's that he is trying to protect her because he can't cope with the idea of the loss of her. And so Hopper is this character who is like so eager, literally eager to die for the people around him, whether that is in Vietnam, whether it is, he's going to be the one that goes into the Upside Down with Joyce to get Will, whether that is, I'm going to go run into these Russians and take them out and, die. I'm going to run through the snow barefoot and get frostbite and maybe hope that I'll survive and not have to be put back into a Russian war camp. I don't know, this is a man who is so eager to die for his daughter, but not actually raise her. And they have such a strained relationship. I don't know. There's just a lot of things in this season that aren't landing with me that in seasons prior really worked. And I don't know if it's because there is an age gap now between the characters and their actors in a way that there wasn't when they were much younger. I don't know if it's because there's just too many characters for them to be writing, but it just feels like we've seen a version of this in pop culture this year in The Last of Us, and we've seen it done really, really well in Joel and Ellie, and we just get to this point where Elle and Hopper are now having this conversation at episode 5, and yet their relationship is going to have to be fixed and resolved by episode 8. And this is a major piece of tension that is existing between these two characters. And this isn't not the only coupling that we have this with. We have it with Jonathan and Nancy, which we're going to talk about, and Dustin and Steve. And, it's just a lot of separation in our characters on an emotional front, and I don't think that that's bad storytelling. It's realistic and it's important for the growth of our characters. But this thing between Hopper and Elle just feels like a conversation that is being had even still, not fully, where she's like, are you just gonna make jokes and that's what you're gonna do? I like the idea of this tension. I don't love the way that it's executed, and I don't feel like we have enough time for everything to reach its emotional conclusion in a way that feels so fulfilling. And their relationship, Elle and Hopper's relationship, was so important to me in season 2. And even in season 2, he leaves her. He leaves her for a majority of the season to the point where she leaves the state and he does not know. It's not good parenting. And it's just speaks so much to how much you can love somebody and how you can also not be the right thing for them, and how as a parent you can make choices that just really are just not the right choices for your kids, or not really thinking about them at all. Being willing to die for your daughter and not having to live with the consequence of her grief are two very different things from a man who is so riddled with grief he can't let his daughter do anything. And I like the juxtaposition of that. I like that as far as we should be exploring that in a story, but not when we have this much mythology, not when we have these many characters, and not when we're going to get it in this sort of half-hearted way. I don't know. Let me know what you guys thought about this conversation with Hopper and Elle. That is femandfuriouspod@gmail.com. So we have Holly sneaking out of the Creel house then to go find Max. They start talking about Henry's plan. Holly is like, guess what? He's not leaving again, so we need to come up with another plan, and we need to get the fuck out of Camazotz right now. And Derek overhears them, and Holly is like, you can't come with us. You can't sit with us, right? You can't come with us, but you can essentially be the bait that helps us escape, which I thought was really fucked up of Holly, and I thought was really fucked up of Max to be like, yeah, this is a good plan. So we kind of hop back to our crew at the Squawk. They are trying to come up with their own plan. They are trying to regather their pieces, And so we get these dual plans by the Sinclair, siblings. Erica suggests that they go seek out Mr. Clark since Dustin is not available to them since he's in the Upside Down. Use Mr. Clark to create a new telemetry tracker or to be able to triangulate Dustin in some way. Lucas, on the other hand, suggests a plan that he said it's bolder and it's better. He says that they should take one of the dead demogorgons that has been left in the melee, of everything that has just happened, and electrocute it with the voltage from the squawk tower in order to activate the particles like they did with Billy in the sauna or like they did with Will in the hot house, right? And therefore, that will activate the hive mind and give Will instant access to the hive mind. So those are our plans, and that's what our crew is doing. That's what they're preparing for. Then we have our car crew, which is Jonathan, Nancy, Steve, and Dustin. They are still in the Upside Down. They have left the Rowan Cemetery in order to go find Hawkins' lab in the Upside Down because that is the center of the circle. And so they sort of have aborted their mission of waiting for Hopper and Elle to show up, which we shall talk about. And so this is a moment where, once again, we are in a critical exploration of the tension between our characters while also not having nearly enough time to do it. And this is where I was like, these emotional beats really, really hit. And yet the clock is ticking. We only have so many episodes. If we had another season, if we're getting another, here's, it's not the finale next week, but another dump and then another dump, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like there's enough time. I'm sorry. I'm feeling a little panicked. Can you tell? So Dustin and Steve end up splitting up after not being able to go 10 seconds without being cruel to each other. They just continue to get meaner and meaner as their story goes on. Okay, we're going to leave Dustin and Steve off to the side for a minute. And we're going to go to Jonathan and Nancy because Jonathan asked Nancy if he's done something to piss her off. It's have I done something to annoy you? Why'd you put me in the doghouse? And it seems like he's trying to pick a fight, maybe because of everything that's just happened with Steve, because Steve was like, Nancy, let's go together. And what ends up coming out is that he says he's scared. And this is what's driving him to have this conversation. And this is actually one of the things that is working the most for me in a couple that has not felt successful to me in a long time. And I really, really loved the way that they handled the Nancy and Jonathan stuff this season. And in particular, right here. So he's driving this conversation with her because he's scared. He's like, I don't know what's going on out there. But what I do know is, and he doesn't say this, but I'm saying this, when there's a lot of stuff that you can't control, you tend to focus on the one thing that you can, or the two things that you can, and you white knuckle them until you can't anymore. And sometimes that can be really suffocating, depending on what the thing is. But in this case, he can't control what is happening with all of these other pieces with Vecna and their search and these crawls and whatever. But he can control having a difficult conversation with somebody that he cares about, and that's Nancy. So the thing that stirs this conversation, right, is Jonathan saying that Nancy hesitated when Steve suggested they teamed up together, and she denies it, and he says, I know you, Nancy. And he asks her to be honest with him. And Nancy calls him out. She goes, honest like you've been honest? And you can see him searching her eyes. What do you know that I don't know? And then he says, of course I've been honest with you, or whatever he says. And she says, you hesitated. No, I didn't. And she goes, I know you, Jonathan. And that hesitation was the size of a Mack truck. And this is now telling us what their tension point is about. Nancy's problem with Jonathan is the fact that there is something that she knows that he has not told her. We know this from last season when Jonathan and Argyle are having a conversation and he says, didn't apply to Emerson. And that was his plan. Him and Nancy were supposed to go together. Now it doesn't really matter because plans change. Now Hawkins is a quarantine zone, a militarized, sector of the world. And so, it doesn't really matter anyway, because Nancy also was not going to end up going to Emerson because the world ended up splitting open and now no one's leaving or coming into Hawkins. However, she obviously knows this to a certain degree. How she knows, we don't know, but there is stuff that he has kept from her that she knows that is weighing on the shoulders of their relationship. And so he goes to have this conversation. This tension feels appropriate to me. The conversation timing feels appropriate to me. And even though, she brings up, she's like, well, my sister is missing. Like, this isn't the time. And he's like, it's exactly the time, because I've been where you are. I understand how you feel. And this is the only thing that we can control. We're going to keep looking. We're going to do that too. But I love you and I care about you. And like, we need to be a team. That's what he says. And so he tries to bridge this gap and ends up sort of widening the gap a little bit. But I really loved this conversation between the two of them. And I thought it was honest and an honest depiction of relationships in general. So much of this, so much of this episode revolves around the lies that we tell ourselves and the lies that we tell our loved ones and what justifies the lie. And this is true for Hopper, and this is true with Jonathan. And it's just really good when you think about it that way. Again, the emotional beats of this episode hit. The functional mythology pieces for me, I don't think did. So let's talk about Callie. I know there's a lot of theories online that Callie is the mind flayer, that she's working with Vecna. I'm not sure how I feel about that quite yet. But I'm going to let it percolate in the next couple of days, and we'll be able to see what is true or not true as we get to the finale in a couple of days. But I will say that when Callie says in her speech, I knew everything about Henry except that he was alive, there is a flash of red lightning behind her. And then we get her story that she was found, they killed her friends, she was taken by the lab. We see them shaving her head. Callie says that Dr. K needed her blood, and she kept taking, and I began to think of her as a vampire. That's, again, going back to our femme frame today as vampires as a, feminine horror. But she goes on to say that she was being drugged. And then we cut back from the vision that Callie is projecting, the flashback. I'm not really sure if Callie is projecting this for Elle to see or if she's just recalling it and we're getting a flashback, but I get the impression that we're supposed to think that it is a physical projection that Elle is able to see. But we cut back from that vision and we see Callie in real time say to Elle, all I knew was I needed to get out of there and the only way out was death. And again, at the mention of death, we get more lightning, red lightning behind Callie. We see her then kill 3 doctors with a scalpel and begin to make her escape attempt. And as she is moving through her escape attempt, we see that there are pregnant women hooked up to tables with 8's blood being dripped into them in an IV. And, 8 basically says, Callie basically says that they are sick and they are dying because of whatever is in Callie's blood. So I can't be sure 100%, but it looks to me like Callie runs through at least 9 rooms that I could count. So 9 pregnant women who are part of this brand new Nina project. Seeing it in this capacity did fucking make my stomach churn. It really did. I really was like, I understand why they went here, but once again, I was like, wow, this is like a big thing to be introducing at episode 5 when we have 3 episodes basically to wrap this up. But that's just me, okay? And it changes the story a little bit about why they were like so ruthlessly hunting Elle last season. Okay, so Callie goes on to say that unlike what we originally thought, Elle and Callie and the rest of the other children did not get their powers through psychedelics, which is essentially what we learned from Terry Ives back in like season 1 or season 2, where I think it's in season 1 where she says, you know, my sister was into like some weird experiments. They were doing experiments with psychedelics, you know, and it ended up messing with her brain really, really bad. So I think we see it reinforced in some paperwork, whether that is, you know, again in season 2 as Elle is reading through it or whatnot. But yeah, originally we get sort of like an exposition dump that, you know, Elle's powers were created through psychedelics. They helped open the mind, and that is how this was achieved. Now we learn that they were created, these other children were created through Henry's blood, and that this is why they have been searching high and low for her, for Elle in particular, because Callie's blood isn't working, and they need Elle's blood instead because Elle is closer to Henry's image. Why? Well, I don't know. She was the 11th child made, so why is she more valuable or more connected or, you know, in kinship to Henry in that way? No idea, but that is what it is. So then we get Callie projecting this sequence of Elle being essentially captured and hooked up to the same machine that they just found Callie in. And as Callie is projecting this, you know, Elle is like, this is all a projection. It's not real. That projection is blocking Hopper. So Elle can see it, but Hopper cannot because Elle kind of swipes her hands through it and Hopper's on the other side of the projection and he says, whoa, it's just me. So he did not see the projection, only Elle saw the projection. And that projection that Callie put onto Elle blocks her from Hopper. So to me, there is something weird between Hopper, Callie, and Elle going on here, that she is either playing on the riff or playing on the divide, that she's just witnessed these two people fighting, and is trying to come between them even more or separate them even more. I'm not sure. I don't know if I feel that she's good or she's bad. I don't really like the plan that she's suggesting. But I don't really want it to be that the Duffer Brothers brought her back only for her to be sort of like a villain in the end that is manipulating Elle in some way. We then get the argument. So now I'm going to cut back to Dustin and Steve, who are arguing over selfishness. Steve calls Dustin out for leaving Hopper and Elle behind in order to pursue this plan, and then calls him out for missing the crawl because he wanted to get into a fight. And Dustin quips back that Steve is dumb because he's pining after someone else's girlfriend, aka Nancy. And when Steve says that Nancy is just a friend, he kind of goes in for the kill. He's like, do you remember what that's like, having friends? Insinuating that Dustin is pushing everyone away who matters to him. And Dustin replies, yeah, I do. I remember what it was like to have a good friend, a real friend who actually believed in me and who was actually kind to me. He wasn't perfect, but at least he knew that, unlike you. He was never fake. He didn't care what other people thought about him. He was just himself. And you know what? He was the smartest, kindest person I've ever met. And this is where Dustin's tension is coming from, because he's had this sort of mentor relationship with Steve, who has tweaked things about him. This is how you get a girl. You act like this, not like that. You do your hair like this, not like that. And they've had a relationship that has depended on their banter because they were unlikely friends, whereas they would have never been together in a scenario had Dustin's party, Lucas, Will, Mike, and begrudgingly Max at this point, had they been available to him in season 2 when he's looking for Dart and everyone's off in their own corners doing their own thing. And so he has no choice but to seek out this friendship with Steve. And it's one of the things that we love the most. We love them as a pairing. We love the two of them together. And yet it's like unlikely animal friends, you know, a bunny being friends with a snake or something like that. They're not really alike. They wouldn't really run in the same circles if they were the same age. Steve is popular. He's a jock, right? Dustin's a nerd and a science geek and plays D&D. They would have run in different circles, and yet they built this camaraderie and this friendship, but it's built on sort of this banter, because this is like where we start to get snarky Dustin. He's like, do you still have this bat? Like, screw these flowers that you have for Nancy. She's not home. Where is she? It doesn't matter. Like, get in the car. We've got to go. They've always had this, like, sort of banter back and forth relationship. And so the relationship that Dustin has with Eddie is very different, where Eddie welcomes him in, and we also play D&D, and I'm also a freak, and I also, he's not really that smart, right? He's not a person that we can say is academically smart in the same way that Dustin is academically smart. And so the fact that Dustin continues to pick at Steve when Eddie was a super senior, like multiple times over, this is going to be the year that I graduate, I can feel it. That's one of the things that Eddie says. Steve also not being academically minded, I think, reminds Dustin of Eddie in a way. And yet, these two people have demonstrated kindness and compassion, right? Steve is one of our favorite characters. He's one of the most compassionate characters. That a character that he thinks he's maybe has a crush on is gay, comes out as gay, and he wildly accepts it with like so much grace and humor and love for this person, and they build such a important relationship in the show. Or the fact that, you know, Nancy doesn't really break up with Steve, but ends up having a conversation with him at one point where she's like, you know, I'm sorry because I'm kind of like with Jonathan now. And he's like, it's all right, Nance. It's okay. Like, he drives Dustin to the snowball. He's a good friend. We see him come like a really long way. And so we know that he is a kind person. And yet, like, him and Dustin continue to be so mean and hurtful to each other. But is that not true for the relationships that matter the most to us, that we just know where to hit the Achilles heel, so to speak? We know what the weakness is. We know what's going to pack the most punch. If you've ever, you know, listened to Dane Cook when he's like, this is like an oldie but goodie, when he's like, the girl plants the seed in the argument. She's like, you're just like your father. And he starts blowing up over like all of this stuff. And he's like, and I'm nothing like my father. That's kind of what this is, right? Where we're able to plant the seed where, you know, strike where it hurts the most for a person that we love. And so Steve points out that Eddie didn't really save anybody, that he's not that smart because he, you know, made the heroes play when he didn't really need to. And while I think that that's very true, it was a necessary completion to Eddie's arc where he felt like he was making the same mistake of running away over and over again. And so Steve is able to, you know, bring this up to Dustin, and this is what ultimately causes their fist fight. And then, you know, and then Steve walks away. It is at that point that Dustin walks into this room. He sees this room behind them and finds all of these notes from Brenner. And while that's happening, we cut to Jonathan and Nancy, and Jonathan points out that there's no spores where they are. There's all this sort of like melted resin, it almost looks like, on the walls. There are people implanted in this melted resin, but he does make note that there are no spores here and that the air is clean, is what he says. Then we get dipshit Derek lost in the woods, doesn't know how to use a compass, doesn't know where Northwest is, found by Henry, who ultimately shows him, you know, in a very Creel-like manner, his dad with his eyes, you know, plucked out, mom, same way, and his sister. And this obviously sways Derek's, you know, vibe. He's now scared for his family, and so he sort of bends the knee to Vecna. We then flash back at our Scott crew, who is ready to electrocute the demo. It starts to work. The particles are going. Will then connects to the hive mind. He sees the Creel house through Derek's mind. This is how they discover that Max is with Holly, who we discover has an exit plan. They have a path to the exit now that they've gone through all of these different Holly memories. And this is when Henry/1 finds them. And we get this sick shot of Henry kind of like doing the circle as like his different personalities are like trying to figure out which one is going to shine through. And ultimately it lands on 1, like a blood spattered 1. And then it slowly turns to Vecna. We see like the vines, you know, starting to make their way down his hands as he comes down the stairs, and then turns the corner as Vecna. Max tries to break out. Vecna grabs her. At long last, the fox is caught. So I am wondering what happens if you die in the Mind Palace, because I guess it just means that you die in real life. As he's choking her, we see in the hospital that her heart monitor is slowing down. Now, last season, their bodies kind of hovered off the floor and they were in a trance. But I guess because Max's heart is just stopping here, it's because he's choking her versus doing like the hand thing over her face. I'm not really sure. But anyway, Will is able to tap into Vecna's mind. He sees him choking Max. He breaks his leg, which I find a curious choice since, again, part of the D&D mythology to which I know very little about. It tells us that the eye and the hand of Vecna are important critical things, especially as artifacts. So in my Google search, this is what I found. The hand and the eye of Vecna are legendary magical items, remnants of his destroyed body, granting immense power to those who dare to use them. So seems like we should be getting that somewhere, and yet he breaks his legs. Okay. Will then possesses Vecna and talks to Max through Vecna and tells her to run. Henry is the one who ends up standing up from this and goes into his mind palace, a very Sherlock Holmes BBC style, and starts yelling at Will to get out and ends up pushing him, physically uses his hand to push him out of his head, and we see Will's physical body at the squawk go flying, and he ends up completely knocked out, and Robin ends up going and, turning the amp all the way up and burning all of the particles out. And this is where the particles leave the body and start swirling up into the sky. Now, remind me to come back to this in a couple of episodes, okay? Just we're putting a note on this if you haven't gone ahead. Dustin then kind of tries to call Nancy and Jonathan and says, don't do anything. And Nancy is insistent on shooting it, which kind of annoys me because Steve and Dustin are also in the same location as them. So I just feel like even if you found this thing, you could pause and go find these other people and then come back to this place. It's not like the matter of 10 minutes that it will take for you to get downstairs to upstairs should theoretically change anything. And yet Nancy decides anyway that she is going to shoot it because this girl is trigger motherfucking happy. Okay? The only thing that Nancy wants in this life is her rifle. So she shoots and it immediately cuts to black. And that is the end of this episode. All right, let's crack open the burn book where we will look at the superlatives for this episode. The Bold and Bothered Award. This is for the Strictly Femme and the Furious. It is the quote or the moment that relays the most feminine rage. And for this award, it goes to Nancy. I know you, Jonathan, and that hesitation was the size of a Mack truck. The Shiro Award. This award goes to the baddie who is the most inspiring or the moment that is the most empowering. It is Joyce finally believing in Will and finally crafting a plan that lets him put himself at risk. The Femme Fatale Award, for the most smash the patriarchy moment of the episode. And this is Callie fucking up the doctors in the labs. She just kills those doctors with a scalpel like it's no biggie. And it would be sick if Callie was a character that I cared about. Speak Your Truth Trophy. Mike calls out to Robin as she goes to start the electrocution process for the Demogorgon. He screams out, "Light it up, Frankenstein," and she just calls back over her shoulder, "It's Frankenstein," which is from Young Frankenstein, which is one of my favorite movies. Honorary heartthrob, because I'm just a girl, okay, and I want to talk about the most wound-worthy moments, and that is the second that Will mentions Max, Lucas is like, what? What about Max? Lucas is so down bad for this girl. I love them. Okay. Retro Glow. Best 80s nostalgia. It is the Bugles, though we did not see anyone put them on their fingers to pretend that they are nails. But there is also a shot of Holly and Max at the school with like the metal tube that you used to crawl through. And that was very distinct to me as an 80s nostalgia piece. And I did not even grow up in the 80s. And yet I've been on playgrounds with those and those do not exist anymore. Now they're like plastic, but this is just like a metal tube that you used to just crawl through or like sit in. And then Boombox Bliss. Heart and Soul. We see little Debbie, maybe, I don't know what her name is, plucking away at it on the piano. And that sort of like merges into the actual song and they're singing like heart and soul. And it was really great and I loved it. And that is our episode today. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this episode, share it with your friends, tag me on social media, leave a review, all that fun stuff. I will be back on Friday. I am talking with Lynn Harris of Gold Comedy, and then I will be back next Tuesday. We are doing episode 6 of this season of Stranger Things, Escape from Camazotz, so you can look forward to that. And until then, rest, because tomorrow is when the real work begins.